So this is a live project based coding question. So let's read the task description and try to solve this question. So this task is about creating an Angular application which allows us to create a cricket team by selecting players from a list. So there must be players in the application and we must be able to select them and form a team. So, and the application allows user to create a team by choosing from a list of players. The users can perform the following operations. So we should be, if the user cannot find a required player in the given list, they can add a new player to the list and use that player from the team. And users can change the role of an existing player. For example, if the player is batsman, then we should be able to change his role to a bowler or a wicket keeper. And also we should be able to delete the player as well. So this should support basic read, create and delete operations and update too. Um, so the application will come with the inbuilt editor. So this is a VS Code editor, but you don't need to write anything locally. So the application will the editor will run in browser environment. So you have an inbuilt browser editor to work with. And one important thing is, so usually the VS Code comes with different options for you. This one will help you to check the file structure, what are the files. So this is a standard Angular project generated by Angular CLI, and you should be able to search for files. And so this is a source control, so which is not needed in this assignment. So but we can do some debug with this one and this one for extension. And the main important thing is the last icon. So this is the WeCP projects icon. So when you click on it, you will get different options. So things like how we start the front end server, how we open browser preview and test and submit the application. Because we don't use the CLI here, so we just use the WeCP projects extension to start the application and check the browser preview and test and do the submission as well. Let's try to read the important notes as well, so it's easier for us to get and understand what is expected from this assignment as well. So yeah, so it is saying us to click on the explore button on VS Code side toolbar to access the project directory. So we have already done that one. And any changes made to a player in the players list must reflect in the teams list as well. So this is a very important thing. Let's see how we can fulfill this requirement. Any change made in a player, just keep in mind, so any changes made a player in the players list must reflect in the teams list as well. So there must be a way for us to do some kind of like a in a angular way. We should be able to broadcast these changes from one component to another or one service from to another service. So there are certain ways in Angular that we can do it as well. So it is expecting us to do it as well. So and a team must have exactly two batsmen, two bowlers, and one wicket keeper. This is kind of a validation that we have to achieve. So if our team does not fulfill this criteria, then of course we will have to give some validation errors. So and the and then as the next part of the question, important notes, it is saying when the number of batsmen in the team is not exactly two, the application must throw the message you do not have the required number of batsmen in your team. And similarly, when the team number of bowlers in the team is not exactly two, we have to display the error you do not have the required number of bowlers in your team. And similarly, of course, a team can have one wicket keeper. So if we do not have one wicket keeper, then we should show an error you do not have the required number of wicket keeper in your team. So there is a there are some files which are already provided from the project for our convenience. So for example, if we look at the project structure, so usually in an Angular project everything resides under src and app folder. So you will need to expand this directory structure. And let's go to, now this is a combination of players and teams, so everything should reside on the players and team. So we will just check this player model.ts. So model is kind of an interface. So here we are using TypeScript. So we have used TypeScript to define how a player should look like. So player should have an ID, it should have a name, and it should have a description as well, right? So this is how when we add in a player we have to follow this structure. And most of the code for the application is already written. Of course we can see a lot of uh, HTML component.ts files, CSS files are there, but what is expected from this assignment is for us to actually we have to change only two files. So that's very important to note here. We don't need to change any other files, so we don't need to touch any other files. Uh, so we have to do the changes only on these two service files. One is player.service and the other one is team.service, and we should be able to successfully build the application. So and also we don't the assignment is not expecting us to do any kind of a CSS, so it has clearly mentioned that we don't need to do any kind of a styling. It is already written, and we don't actually we shouldn't do any changes in other files. It has already it has clearly been mentioned here. We, we do not need to make changes in any other files except player.service and team.service, and we must pass all the test cases in order to get the full marks on this question. So how we pass all the test cases? So we have this test and submit button, and we should be able to click it. Now let's try to click it and see what happens. So we didn't do any change here, and I'm going to test and submit the app. So now it is showing me in the console. Now it's running test. So I feel like that I need it's better to increase the font a little bit so that you guys can see it properly. I guess now this is a readable font size. So now it's compiling the code. Mm, yeah, here you can see I didn't do any change, but I just test the application. So it's giving me it's saying okay, you have three fails and three success actually. So which means we have to fix these failures. And how do we fix the failures? Yes, we have to write two services. We have to actually change only two files, and we should be able to get the test cases pass. So let's check the player.service first. I will just close this terminal so that you can see the uh, full view here. So you can see here this is a player service, so which resides under players directory. So there are methods that's written in the service already, but you can see it has been clearly mentioned the comments in the comment section. Okay, we have to do this kind of a we have to add this kind of logic to this method. So one thing to note is we are not fetching any data from a server, or there are any kind of like a no network request are being made in this application. So it's a very simple application. The data is hard coded. You can see here, so all the data is hard coded. So we have to do the changes with this data. So there is no network calls to be made. So it's a fairly a simple assignment, so that you don't need to deal with any kind of like a additional libraries like HTTP client in Angular. That kind of thing is not required at all. uh, and so this is the players array. So it is containing an array of players. So a player, it can have an ID, and a player has a name and the description. Actually this is the role actually. So but in the model it represents as description, but you can safely assume that description is same as the role. Okay, now we have different methods. They are uh, get player, add player, update player, and delete player. So we will have to implement these methods. So this is the player service file. And also let's look at the team.service file, because since only these two files are needed to be changed. So if we look at the team.service, so you can see here team service is also a fairly simple file. It has a bunch of methods. Get team. So get team method is already implemented. So it is already implemented for us. Edit, there's a method called edit player, and add player, delete player, and get status. So it's a pretty explanatory. So things like edit player, it should edit the player of with the given ID, and add player should add a player to the team, and also it should give an error. So if like when we add in a player, if the player already exists, yeah, we should warn, okay, this player already exists in the team. And this should delete player method should delete the player by a given ID. And get status method, the what is expected from this method is it should return error message. So if a team does not have exactly two batsmen, two bowlers, and one wicket keeper, okay, we should check within a team whether these conditions are met. If not, we have to throw an error. So we have gone through the questions, and we have checked the file structure and what are the expected methods as well. So there is so once we have done the application, okay, we can start the front end server. So I'll show you how you do it. You go to WeCP projects, you click on WeCP projects icon, then you have to click on start front end server. So this will start your Angular application. So you can see npm run start is being executed, then your Angular code is being compiled. And yeah, so it's yeah, now it's generating browser application bundle. So now we are in the building phase, and yeah, you can see, yeah, it's compiled successfully. Now I need to see the output, so I have to click on open browser preview. So this will load my application in a browser. So you can see, okay, so these are the data that's coming from those players array. uh, okay, now let's go to this mm, we have some testing and submitting instruction for testing and submitting. So yeah, we check the open browser preview as well. And once we have done the code changes and test and submitted application, it's all working well, we do not get any errors. So in that case, yeah, so if we get this kind of like if our all test cases are passed, then yeah, we are good to go with submitting the final assignment. uh, so yeah, let's try to get these all the test cases passed. So I will just go to, so there are two files, player as a dot service and team dot service. I will first start with the player.service, and so I will just try to change the player dot service file. So now you can see here, get players method, it's already written for us. Generate ID is already written for us. So but we have to work on the get player method. So get player method, it should return the player for a given player ID. So the ID is being passed to the method. uh, so now let's try to I have, if I have an ID, how do I fetch a player from a given ID? So for that, actually you can use some array methods. So we can use here some ES6 notations as well. So uh, I have to find the player here. So my players are in this array. So what I would do is I would say, okay, this players dot find method. Find method will return me a player. So I would say, okay, player dot uh, ID is equal to ID. So in that case, this will return the player. Actually, it will return a player if found. If a player is not found, it will return undefined. So the so what happens is when the test cases are being run, so there will be some dummy data passed to this method. So that's how the test cases are getting successful. So from our .spec files, so here we do not really have the access to our spec files, but when a test are being run, uh, so from the spec file there will be some dummy data being passed to this method to the check whether we have implemented these methods correctly. So actually, yeah, so you can see I'm getting a player from a given ID. And now let's see how we can implement the add player method. So add player method, it should add a player to our uh, players array, right? So how do we do it? It's very simple. We can use the push methods in array to push an element to an array. So we don't need to do any change to an array because it's just add player, right? So what we would do is we will say, okay, this dot players. So we have the push method in an in array, and we push the player which is coming from the coming as a parameter. But do you remember any changes made to player in the players list must reflect in the teams list as well? So now we have added a player, so this will change our players array, but we have to communicate this change to the team service as well. So how do we do it? You can see here the players change, there is a subject here. So if we broadcast a message from a subject, so from another service we can subscribe to it and we can get the resulting changes. So for that, actually we can use in order to fulfill this requirement what is mentioned in important notes under 2, we can fulfill this one using a subject. So the subject is already been provided for us. What we have to do is we have to use the subject. So I would say, okay, this dot players change, that's the subject. So I would say, okay, emit using next, and I would say, okay, so I did a change to player. So now our players list has been changed with a new player. uh, I can get the new players list using this method. So I will say, okay, get me the new players, and my subject will broadcast this new change with the updated players list. So we have done some changes. We have implemented add player method. So let's try to test our application. So earlier there were 6 failed test cases. Now let's see whether we have any. Mm, yeah, it is still running. Okay, so now it's actually 4 failed, we have 5 success, so that's great. So we are doing some improvements. Okay, now let's go to update player method. So update player, so when the what should it do is it should update the player, of course. So updates the player given the index and new change values. So I would say okay, so we are going to update the player. So I would update the role or the description of this player here. New player uh, dot description. Uh, I would say okay. Let's change this player to a bowler, and I would say okay. This dot players. So I need to get the index here. Now let's see how we can replace from an index. I would say okay, by an index and add the new player value here. So what I'm doing here is I'm referring to my players array, and I'm just changing the index. I'm referring to the particular index, and I'm changing the object that is in that particular index. So for example, I'm replacing the index maybe 0, 1 or 2 with my new player object. So new player has a description. Now I have changed it to a bowler. So this new object will be replaced in this index. Let's see whether we are able to console log anything with this one. uh, let's see whether we can console log the index and new player. So it's better to do a console log if possible, so that you can so mm, yeah, now let's try to submit that and see whether we are getting any kind of a console log statement. mm, yeah, it didn't give any output here, but let's see whether if you are using Angular, of course you should be able to run npm run test as well, because if we go to our package JSON, there should be a similar command here. So this is just some additional information for you to debug. So let's try it, run npm run test to see whether we are getting any kind of like a console log statements here. So it's easier for us to debug in that case. So yeah, it now ng test is being executed. mm, Here you can now see actually. So updated player index is 6. Update player, new player. So new player, okay. So now let's see which index that we are going to replace here. So it's actually saying okay, index 6 that we are going to replace here. So it's coming with okay, all right, okay, you can see here uh, this is the new player. New player has this information, and we are going to update it at the index 6. So uh, actually there is a kind of a error with the index. You can see here, right? Update play index is 6. Actually, array indexes, it starts with 0, but here uh, actually it should be index 5. So there could be that kind of a errors, given errors in an assignment, so that you will have to slightly modify your code to facilitate those changes. Because if we replace the index 6, it will replace the wrong player. It will replace R Ashwin. But what should be replaced, by looking at the data you can see, okay, they are going to replace the Natarajan, right? But that's on index 5. But yeah, in the code itself we can achieve the we can actually overcome this issue. So the console log statement, they really helped us. So we'll go to this code. Okay, this dot players index, actually we have to say index minus 1 because we need to replace the index 5, because the we know that arrays are 0 base index. And yeah, we added the new player here to the given index. So we have to, similarly we have to notify our changes to outside. How we do it? We use the subject, and after that uh, we get the players and we notify the changes. So the main important thing here is, for us to work this properly, we have to use the -1. If we use the index, it will replace the wrong player, and your test, it's very likely they will get failed. So let's go to WeCP projects extension and try to test and submit. So let's see whether we are uh, getting better, or whether our test cases are, number of failures are getting reduced or not. Yeah, now you can see 4 failed to 3 failed, right? We were able to do some kind of improvements. Let's see what happens if we use index without index -1. Let's try to test and submit. You can still see we didn't do any improvement. We are still on 4 failed. So of course the basic catch here is to use index -1. Okay, now we are good with that one. Now let's move to delete player method. So of course delete player, it should delete a player from the players list, right? So how do we delete a player? So you can use different array methods. So things like you can use a filter if needed, but simply I use the splice method. So if you are not like if it is not on top of your head, yeah, you can refer some documentation to know what splice method does is, it will like we can pass the index. So for example, I would say this no players, okay, splice. So I can pass the index, okay, just remove the player from the player in this index, and I can also mention the number of elements to remove. Here of course by default it will set to 1, if I'm not mistaken, but yeah, we can say okay, let's set it to 1, so we are certain that we are removing only one element. If you want to remove two elements, then you can say, okay, remove two elements from this index, starting from that index. But we want to remove one index, and we are saying, okay, delete the player in this particular index. So we don't need to, like, when we are updating, we had to use that index minus 1. That's because the data, we saw that that's actually some error in the application, right? They are not passing the correct index here. But actually, when deleting a player, we don't need to do that one, because we can, this will just give a index, and we have to do the delete. If the index doesn't exist, then yeah, it should not delete the player. So the splice method, actually it will mutate the array, so you don't need to assign it to another array. So this is a mutating function as well, so it's worth to mention. So once the player is deleted, I will similarly notify the changes here. Players change. Next, this dot get players. Okay, so we have implemented all the given methods in the player.service file. So let's try to test our player service. Maybe, like, let's see whether we are doing any improvements, but we have to change the team.service as well. So I will press, if you're on a Windows, you can press Control P, or if you're on a Mac, you can press Command P to go to a file in VS Code. Okay, I will go to team.service as well. Yeah, so it's still three failed test cases, so we haven't done any improvements here, but maybe the tests are not being written for the delete player, so that's okay. But let's move with the team.service as well to see whether we are doing any improvements. uh, Also, you can, yeah, see the application, but we are specifically targeting for the test cases, as we are not doing any kind of a UI implementation. We are just changing the services files. So let's go to the team.service file. So team.service file, actually it should contain different methods. So one is edit player, and one is add player, delete player, and get status method. So the get team method is already implemented for us. It will return the team. So team, it's actually an array of players. So we'll start with the edit player method. So when we are editing a player, we get the ID. So this should be the ID of the player and the new player object. So what we have to do is, okay, we have to first find where this player exists, index, and I would say, okay, this team is an array of players, so I should be able to do the find index of this player dot id is equal to this id. So I'm just checking whether the player id is equal to the past id. If I find I should be able to find the index of this particular player with this id. Then I would simply say, okay, this team index new player, uh, yeah, this dot, sorry, equal new player. Yeah, you, if need, like, if needed, you can check whether the index, it's a correct index. If this player doesn't exist, then it should not return, it should return -1 actually. So you can do some kind of additional check, like whether the index is -1 or not, but I'm not going to do it because here we are getting some dummy data, so this ID should represent. But it's worth to mention that if you want to do some kind of like additional check, we can do that one as well. So we change the player, like the edit the player, and we added the edited player to the team. So we have done the change. So this will work as like editing a player in the team. Maybe we can change the player type, like a role from batsman to bowler or that kind of a thing. mm, and we'll go to the add player method. So this should add a player to the team. If the player already exists, then we have to show an error as well. So let's implement that add player method. But first of all, we need to check whether we have already added the uh, player earlier. So we can check that one using a find method in an array. So I would say, okay, player exist, and I would say this team dot find player. Player dot id is equal to player dot id. So what I'm doing is using find method. I'm saying, okay, loop through all the players in my team and check whether any of the id is equal to the player.id, which is passed to this method. If this is returning a player, then I have a player exist. So I would say, okay, if player exists, then I have to alert this player already exists in the team. I can copy this error message. If not, if this returns undefined, then I can simply push my player to the team because it's a new player, right? Okay, now we have added the player as well. Now let's try to run our test and test uh, test cases. Okay, yeah, we have only one failed test cases, so eight are successful. Now let's try to delete go to delete player method as well. So now you can see we have an ID passed to this method. What we have to do is from the uh, ID we can find the index and do a some kind of like a splice that we did earlier. But I will use a different approach here. We can use there are different ways to remove elements from an array, but this time I will use a filter. So I would say, okay, this T, which means the players, it should this T dot filter player if player dot id is not equal to id. So in this case, what I'm saying is loop through the team or the loop through the players array and check whether the player id is not equal to the id and assign those players to the team. So basically what we are doing here is we remove the uh, player with this given id and assign all the other players to this team, right? So you can use the filter method, uh, array filter method for that one as well to remove elements. The basic catch here is use the not equal to remove the elements with this matching condition. So now we have removed the player from that ID from the team, and after that, yeah, we have implemented all the methods. But there is another important uh, error message handling method in our application, that is get status. So this method should return error message if a team does not have exactly two batsmen, two bowlers, and one wicket keeper. So let's mm, try to implement that method as well. So I would say okay. Uh, so let's say number of batsmen is equal to, I would say okay, get team filter players player dot description, because description is where we store the role of the player. Okay, batsman dot length. What this does is, so this will say okay, loop through my now players and check how many batsmen are in my team. Similarly, we can do the same for number of bowlers. So here it should be bowler, and also for number of wicket keepers. Here it should be wicket keeper. Okay, so now I can use some if condition. If number of batsmen not equal to 2, if it is not exactly 2, then we have to uh, push an error to our status saying uh, I can copy the error from this uh, yeah, here you do not have the required number of, oh, actually we really cannot copy it, so let's type it here. Oh, whether, let's see whether we have a readme file here. No, we don't have that one, so let's type it. You do not have required number of batsmen in your team. Okay, so if number of bowler less than 2, we can say okay, bowler in your team. If number of wicket keepers, so it should be number of wicket keeper should be equal to 1. If not, we have to say you do not have required number of uh, wicket keepers in your team. Okay, so we have uh, added different validation method, and we are pushing it to the status array. Finally we are returning the status. So actually, yeah, now we have implemented all the required methods here. uh, let's try to test our application. So let's see whether we are getting all the test cases successful this time. Mm, yeah, congratulations, you solved the question. So all the test cases are now passing. So if you get this kind of like a, if you can come to this kind of a state, then yeah, you can if you see these successful messages, yes, you have implemented the player.service team.service correctly. So I will just go through the each service again, so that you can get an quick idea about what we did. So this is just to summarize. So we have a players.service file, and inside players.service file we have a hard-coded players array. So a player can have a ID, and a player has a name and a role or a description. In our player.model, it is called description. That's why I'm saying it as description, but you can assume this one as role. So we have to implement the methods, the get player, add player, update player, delete player. So here we find the player by the given ID. So we use for that find method in arrays, and players.push to add a new player, and to update player we use the uh, particular index and update the player. But I saw you there is some issue with the code, so that what I had to do is I had to adjust my method to accommodate that change, because what arrays are zero based, but as the index what we are getting here is indices starting with 1, so that we have to do -1 here. And we can delete player. So I use the splice method, so this will mutate, this will change the original array. So, and also when we are doing any changes to the players, we have to notify it to the outside, which means we have to notify it to team service. So for that we use this subject, and whenever team player is changed or updated or deleted, we notified that change to the outside using the next method. And after that we are in the team service. So here in the team service we can edit a player. So for that actually I use the index method, find index, and if an index is found I just replace it with the new player. Here, as I mentioned earlier, you can check some additional validation, like whether the index is -1. uh, if not, you do the update. And also here, when adding a player, we check whether the player already exists. If so, we display an error message. If not, we push to the teams array. And we can delete a player. For this one I didn't use splice method, I use filtering. And get status method, this should return error messages if a team does not have 2 batsmen, 2 bowlers and 1 wicket keeper. So I use the filter method, and I combine it with length to find number of batsmen, bowlers and wicket keepers present in my team. And if they are not satisfying the conditions given in the question, I do display these errors. By displaying means I just push it to the array, and after that I return the array. So I guess that will clarify this assignment, and I hope that the provided answer is clear for you as well. So once you have successfully completed the assignment, yeah, you should be able to submit it, because you have now passed all the test cases. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, good luck with your assignment.